8-year-old Emily Larson squeezed her stuffed bear against her chest, pressing it to the oval window of the small Cessna Dove. Outside, the late afternoon sky stretched in shades of burnt orange and steel gray, clouds rolling like waves in a restless sea. The hum of the twin engines was almost hypnotic, lulling some of the passengers into uneasy sleep, while others fiddled with seatbelts and phones, attempting to distract themselves from the cramped cabin. Emily, however, was wide awake. She always noticed things: the way the horizon shifted, the way sunlight fractured through the clouds, and how the engine's vibration changed subtly with altitude. Her parents sat nearby, arguing quietly about work schedules, oblivious to the fluttering tension in the cabin. Emily had learned early to read the room, or in this case, the plane. A sudden shudder made her eyes widen. The plane had jolted just enough to make the tiny teacups in the fold-down trays clink against the tray edges. Around her, passengers murmured. A woman gripped the armrest, white-knuckled, while a man muttered something about turbulence. But Emily knew this wasn't ordinary. The tremor came from the engines themselves, irregular, uneven. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm but brittle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing unusual engine activity. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." That word, unusual, made Emily's heart thud. She had memorized aviation manuals with her father, pages filled with diagrams of engine failures and emergency procedures. Her father always said, "Stay calm, Emily. Panic is the first thing that kills people." She gripped the armrest tighter, her mind already scanning every detail of the plane, noting fuel indicators, warning lights, and the slight pitch of the nose. The passengers murmured in fear, whispering about the storm clouds outside, but Emily noticed something they didn't. Far above, silver flashes danced against the edges of the clouds. At first she thought it was sunlight glinting off a contrail, but the shapes moved with purpose, slicing through the sky at impossible speeds. Her stomach tightened. Jets. Military jets. She had read about them, watched videos online, even memorized the different silhouettes of American aircraft. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of awe and dread. The pilots in the silver machines above were moving toward them. But why? The turbulence intensified. The Cessna rocked violently, throwing some passengers into the arms of panic. The man near the emergency exit stood abruptly, his face pale. Is this normal?" he stammered. Emily shook her head subtly, gripping the seat cushion. She wasn't sure anyone else would understand. Most children her age would have buried their faces in a book or screamed. But Emily had a sense of calm she didn't understand herself. The engine stuttered again, louder this time. Smoke trailed faintly from the right nacelle. Emily's mind raced, cataloging everything she had ever learned about emergency flight procedures. She knew the plane's small size was both a curse and an advantage. It could glide farther than most passengers realized, and if she could communicate quickly, maybe, just maybe, they could get help before disaster struck. She turned her gaze to the small intercom panel near the cockpit door. She had noticed it before, during her obsessive observation sessions on previous flights with her father. It was seldom used for passengers, but it might be their lifeline. A sudden lurch threw Emily forward, making her bear slip from her arms. She caught it instinctively, her hands trembling. The passengers gasped. A mother next to her clutched her crying child. The plane's right wing dipped slightly. Emily peered through the window again. The silver jets above were now unmistakably F-22 Raptors, their sleek bodies glinting under the shifting sun. Engines screaming in controlled fury, they moved with precision and coordination that made Emily's stomach twist with tension. The pilots were circling, evaluating the Cessna, a silent storm of steel and fire in the sky. Emily's mind snapped back to the intercom. Her father had drilled her in flight simulations for hours in their garage, teaching her the communication protocols for emergencies, even for military intercepts. "You have to stay calm and precise," he had said. She took a deep breath, swallowing the lump of fear in her throat. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed the button she had noticed before. A small crackle came through. Silence. The co-pilot didn't notice, too busy fighting the controls. But Emily whispered to herself, "They'll hear me if I'm steady." The plane shuddered again, throwing another wave of panic through the cabin. Drinks spilled. A magazine went sliding across the aisle. A man yelped as his laptop crashed onto the floor. Emily ignored it all. She pressed the intercom button again, and this time her small voice cut through the hum of the engines and the screaming turbulence. "Mayday, Mayday, Flight 317, engines failing, we have F-22s above, request immediate assistance." There was a pause, a long, tense silence that made Emily's ears ring. Then came the crackle of a voice, low, incredulous, and authoritative. "Did a kid just call us?" Emily's chest tightened. She nodded even though no one could see her, her hands gripping the armrest. "Yes," she said, voice quivering but determined. "I know what to do, trust me." The passengers froze, disbelief etching their faces. A few laughed nervously, thinking the stress had made her speak up out of childish bravado. Others shook their heads, muttering about how impossible it was that a child could take charge of such a situation. Emily didn't care. She had to focus. The F-22s had adjusted their formation slightly, banking with precision to mirror the Cessna's unpredictable movements. She recognized the patterns. She had studied these exact maneuvers in her father's simulator. A shadow fell over the cabin as one of the jets dipped lower, seemingly to assess the situation more closely. Emily's stomach lurched. The turbulence intensified, the plane's fuselage groaning under the strain. The engine sputtered, coughing smoke again. She glanced at the other passengers. Fear had frozen them in place, but she couldn't afford to freeze. Not now. Not when every second mattered. Emily's eyes returned to the silver jets above. Their pilot formation was almost elegant, terrifyingly so. She could see the glint of the canopy, the slight shimmer of heat from afterburners. And then a horrifying thought struck her. If these jets weren't here, if she hadn't acted, there was no telling where the Cessna would end up. She had imagined emergencies in the simulator, but this, the roar of engines, the trembling fuselage, the tiny humans clutching each other in terror, this was life or death. And just as she braced herself for the next jolt, the co-pilot called out, his voice tight with anxiety, "We're losing altitude fast. Engines at 30% thrust. If they fail completely, we're done for." Emily's pulse raced. She had one chance. One. She pressed the intercom again, this time louder, clearer. "F-22s, you have to guide us. I know what to do. Please help us now." Above, the jets adjusted immediately, banking sharply and forming a protective triangle around the Cessna. Emily's small heart thundered in her chest. Somehow, the impossible was happening. Military pilots were responding to a kid in row 8. But outside the windows, the clouds twisted, the wind picked up, and the world felt like it was tilting on its axis. The plane shuddered violently again. Emily gritted her teeth, holding onto her bear and her courage. She knew she had crossed a threshold from ordinary to extraordinary. And as she looked at the F-22s cutting through the sky with the precision of predators, she realized survival wasn't guaranteed. Not yet. Something else was coming, something bigger than turbulence or failing engines. A threat she couldn't yet see, but that would test everything she had learned. And in that split second, Emily understood one truth that would define the rest of her life. Sometimes, being just a kid isn't a limitation. It's the only thing that can save the day. The silver streak above the Cessna grew larger, cutting through the clouds with a roar that made the tiny plane tremble. 8-year-old Emily Larson pressed her forehead to the small window, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The F-22 Raptors weren't just flying past. They were maneuvering with purpose, almost like they were circling the Cessna, assessing its every movement. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had read about intercept protocols in her father's aviation books, but this was different. Real jets, real pilots, and somehow they were responding to her. The cabin was filled with panic. A mother clutched her child, whispering prayers, while a businessman muttered frantic calculations under his breath. Flight attendants darted up and down the aisle, attempting to reassure passengers but clearly terrified themselves. The plane shuddered again, throwing a paper cup from a tray and spilling its contents over a woman's lap. Emily ignored it all. Her attention was locked on the F-22s above. One of the jets dipped sharply, wings slicing through the cloud cover, and Emily caught a glimpse of the pilot's visor reflecting her own plane, a silver glint against a stormy sky. The right engine sputtered violently, coughing smoke in short bursts. The Cessna tilted sharply and the passengers screamed. Emily gripped her bare knuckles white and whispered a silent promise. "We're not going down today, not if I can help it." She pressed the intercom button again, her small voice clear and firm. "F-22s above. Engines failing. We need guidance. Please help us land safely." There was a long pause. Then a crackling voice replied, incredulous, "Did a child just call us?" Emily swallowed hard, fear and determination warring in her chest. "Yes," she whispered back, "and I know what to do." The pilot's response was immediate. The Raptors adjusted their flight paths, forming a protective formation around the Cessna. One of the jets dipped dangerously low, close enough that Emily could see the metallic gleam of the afterburner. Her pulse raced. She had read about such maneuvers in her father's simulator, but seeing it in real life was overwhelming. The pilots were professionals, trained for war, and yet they seemed to defer to her, an 8-year-old. The thought made her stomach flip, with a mix of terror and pride. The turbulence intensified. The cabin shook violently, throwing passengers against seatbacks. Emily's father shouted her name, eyes wide with disbelief. "Emily, what, how?" But she couldn't answer. Her focus was entirely on the sky outside. She tracked the F-22s, noticing the subtle signals in their maneuvers, the tiny shifts that suggested they were ready to intervene if the Cessna's engines failed completely. The plane lurched again, and a burning smell wafted through the cabin. The right engine had begun emitting a faint trail of black smoke. The co-pilot struggled with the throttles, muttering words Emily barely understood. Her mind raced. She remembered her father teaching her about glide ratios and emergency descent paths. If I can just guide them toward a safe landing spot, maybe they'll make it. Emily's eyes scanned the horizon. A narrow valley stretched below, flanked by jagged peaks and craggy cliffs. A river cut through the middle, its water glinting silver under the setting sun. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only feasible landing area within range. She took a deep breath, steadying her shaking hands, and pressed the intercom again. "F-22s, we need a glide path to the valley. I know the engines are failing, but we can make it if you guide us." The jets above responded almost immediately, signaling with subtle banking maneuvers. Emily's heart leapt. They understood her. She felt a strange connection, an unspoken trust forming between herself and these pilots, people who had spent years in training she could barely imagine. One of the jets mirrored her imagined trajectory, cutting through the clouds like a silver arrow. Suddenly, the turbulence escalated. The left engine shuddered violently. The Cessna pitched, sending a wave of panic through the passengers. Emily's stomach dropped. She clutched her bear and leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the small window as if sheer will could guide the plane. She whispered instructions to the co-pilot, who followed her surprisingly precise guidance. "Bank left, hold steady at 120 knots, align with the valley." Her voice, small but commanding, carried over the roar of engines and panic. The F-22s adjusted in tandem, forming an almost tangible corridor of protection. But then the unimaginable happened. One of the Raptors suddenly banked sharply, throwing a gust of wind that rocked the Cessna violently. Emily's stomach lurched. The turbulence, combined with the failing engines, was pushing them to the brink. A paper cup flew across the cabin, narrowly missing the captain. The co-pilot's face was pale, beads of sweat tracing his jawline. Emily forced herself to stay calm. She had been trained for moments like this in her father's simulator, where failure meant nothing more than restarting a program. This time, failure had consequences far more severe. She whispered to herself, "Focus. Breathe. You can do this." Her small hands gripped the armrest, knuckles white, as the plane lurched again, scraping dangerously close to a low-hanging cloud. Outside, the F-22s communicated silently, their sleek bodies a ballet of lethal precision. Emily could see one pilot's visor reflect the glint of the Cessna's metal skin. She felt a strange, terrifying bond with these strangers in the sky, warriors who now depended on a child's instincts. One of the jets dipped even closer, and she realized something chilling. If she made the wrong call, they could all die, not just the passengers on the plane. The cabin had descended into controlled chaos. Passengers clutched each other, murmuring prayers, sobbing quietly. Emily's parents had pulled her into a brief hug, but she shook her head. She couldn't afford distraction. She had to focus. She peered through the window at the valley below, mapping the river's curves, noting flat patches of sand and gravel. If she could guide the Cessna to that spot, they might survive. It was a slim chance, but in Emily's mind, slim was better than nothing. The engines faltered again. Smoke trailed from the right nacelle in thicker clouds. Emily's heart hammered. The co-pilot's hands shook as he fought the controls. Emily took a deep breath, summoning every bit of training she had absorbed over years of flight simulators and fatherly instruction. She pressed the intercom button once more, her small voice carrying authority beyond her age. F-22s maintain formation. We're heading for the valley. Keep us safe. I'll handle the glide. The jets responded, banking sharply to create a protective wedge around the Cessna. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline and fear. She had never flown a plane in real life, only in simulations, but the knowledge, the instinct, and the clear-headed calm drilled into her by her father were all she had. And now, in the middle of a sky filled with smoke, wind, and roaring jets, they were enough. The right engine coughed violently again, flames flickering from the nacelle. A warning light flashed in the cockpit. Emily's pulse surged. She pressed her forehead to the window, eyes tracing the valley below. It was the only option. She whispered instructions to the co-pilot. Flaps 30 degrees, steady descent, align with the river, he nodded, following her guidance with a mix of skepticism and desperate hope. Outside, the F-22s adjusted their positions, the lead jet signaling the Cessna to maintain altitude and speed. Emily felt a wave of surreal clarity. She was 8 years old on a failing plane directing military jets. The world had narrowed to the roar of engines, the flicker of smoke, and the glinting valley below. She had one chance to keep everyone alive. Then, as if testing her resolve, a violent gust of wind slammed into the plane, tilting it dangerously. A sharp scream pierced the cabin. Emily gritted her teeth, pressing the intercom again. We're still stable, keep formation. Follow the river. We can do this. The F-22s banked in perfect synchrony, creating a corridor of air that shielded the Cessna from the worst of the turbulence. Emily's heart raced. She realized with a mixture of awe and fear that she was no longer just a child in row 8. She was the pilot of the moment, the one everyone depended on, even the military jets above. But just as she steadied herself, the plane lurched violently again. Smoke poured from the right engine, and the co-pilot shouted, "We're losing thrust. Emergency landing is the only option." Emily's stomach dropped. They were closer to the valley now, but the danger wasn't over. She swallowed hard, gripping her bear, and whispered a prayer to herself. "We can make it. We have to." And then a shadow passed over the Cessna, faster than the eye could follow. Something was coming, something Emily hadn't anticipated. She pressed the intercom, voice trembling but resolute. "F-22s, get ready. Something's hitting us. Brace for impact." The cabin of Flight 317 trembled violently as the Cessna Dove pitched and shuddered in the turbulent sky. Passengers screamed, clinging to seats, arms wrapped around children, prayers spilling from trembling lips. Smoke from the right engine wafted into the cramped cabin, acrid and choking, and Emily Larson gritted her teeth against the sting in her throat. 8 years old, clutching her worn stuffed bear, she felt something awaken inside her, an unshakable clarity, the calm in the center of a storm. The F-22 Raptors above had adjusted their positions, slicing through the clouds like silver blades, forming a protective triangle around the struggling plane. Emily's eyes followed every movement, every angle, as if she could read the pilots' intentions through the gleam of their canopies. One pilot banked sharply, almost imperceptibly signaling for her to maintain heading and speed. She realized then that these highly trained military pilots were looking to her. Not as a child, not as a passenger, but as the guide, the only one who could navigate the Cessna to safety. Emily's father shouted her name, disbelief etched across his face, but she barely heard him over the roar of engines and the chorus of alarms. The co-pilot's face was pale, hands trembling on the throttle. I don't know if we can." His words were cut off by a violent jolt that threw him against the dashboard. Emily steadied herself, her small hands gripping the armrest, and pressed the intercom button. "F-22s, listen to me. I know the engines are failing, but there's a valley below. Follow my guidance. I can land this plane." Her voice was small but firm, carrying authority that belied her age. The cabin fell into a tense silence. Passengers craned their necks, unsure whether to panic or to listen. The lead jet adjusted, dipping lower, a glint of sunlight reflecting off its metallic surface. Emily noticed the subtle signals, the tilt of the wings, the flick of the afterburner, guiding her along an aerial corridor she had only imagined in her father's simulator. She felt a surge of adrenaline. The impossible was happening. Trained pilots, military warriors, were now following a child's instructions. The turbulence intensified, rattling the Cessna violently. Smoke poured from the right engine and the instruments blinked warnings she barely understood. Emily remembered every lesson from her simulator sessions: stay calm, assess, and communicate clearly. She leaned forward, her forehead almost touching the small cockpit panel. Left rudder, flaps 30 degrees. Keep steady at 120 knots. "We're heading for the valley," she instructed, voice clear and unwavering. The co-pilot followed her directions, disbelief etched in every line of his face, but he obeyed. The plane responded sluggishly, groaning under the strain, but gradually it aligned with the trajectory Emily envisioned. The F-22s mirrored her every move, shielding the Cessna from the strongest gusts, their immense engines roaring like thunder, creating a corridor of turbulence-canceling air around the tiny plane. Suddenly, a violent shudder rippled through the fuselage. The right engine flared, throwing a streak of fire against the cabin wall. Passengers screamed, some banging on the windows as if sheer force of will could stabilize the plane. Emily's stomach dropped. She pressed her bear to her chest, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and whispered, "We can do this. We have to do this." Her gaze snapped open as she saw the co-pilot struggle to maintain altitude. He glanced at her, panic in his eyes, and she realized the magnitude of the situation. Everyone in the cabin was relying on her. Her small hands pressed the intercom button again. "Throttle up slightly. Hold the wings steady. Follow the lead jet's formation. We can glide to the valley if we work together." Above, the F-22s adjusted their formation. The lead jet dipped lower, closer than Emily had expected, signaling her to maintain speed and angle. She felt a mix of fear and awe. These were some of the most elite pilots in the world, yet they were taking cues from her. Emily's mind raced through every calculation she had memorized: the glide ratio, wind speed, descent angle. She visualized the valley below, the river snaking through it, and imagined the plane touching down gently on the flat riverbank. A violent gust slammed the Cessna sideways, and Emily's stomach lurched. A paper cup from the tray table flew across the cabin, narrowly missing the co-pilot. The plane groaned under the strain. She realized the aircraft's wings were dangerously close to the limits of structural integrity. "If we don't descend soon, we won't make it." Emily pressed the intercom again, hands trembling slightly. "We're approaching the valley. Begin shallow descent. Watch the river bend, it's our marker. We have seconds to align. Steady, steady." The F-22s responded instantly, banking and twisting to maintain their protective wedge. Emily felt a strange sense of camaraderie with these strangers in the sky. They trusted her. Somehow, despite her age and inexperience in real-life flight, she was the linchpin holding this life-or-death ballet together. Then a jolt so violent it nearly threw her from her seat shook the plane. The right engine flared, sparks dancing along the cowling. The co-pilot shouted, "We're losing thrust. Emergency landing is the only option." Emily's stomach dropped. She scanned the valley below. Trees, rocks, and jagged cliffs loomed on either side of the river. One wrong move and they would all crash. She pressed the intercom again, her voice quivering but resolute. "Hold the wings, follow my glide path, trust the formation." The lead F-22 pilot's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. You're actually calling the shots. Are you sure?" Emily's small face set with determination. "Yes, I've trained for this. We can make it. We will make it." A second jolt. Smoke poured thicker from the engine, acrid and suffocating. The co-pilot's hands shook violently on the throttle. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She glanced at the passengers. Faces filled with terror, tears streaming, hands clutching children. She felt a pang of fear, but she swallowed it. Focus. One step at a time. She pressed the intercom button, repeating instructions in concise, precise bursts. The plane began to respond, slowly aligning with the narrow river valley. Emily's eyes tracked the lead F-22, adjusting continuously to mirror its movements. Sweat dripped from her forehead as the cabin shook violently again. The river below grew larger, its winding path glinting like liquid silver. She knew they were close, but one wrong move would send them tumbling into the jagged rocks. Then another terrifying realization struck her. The engines weren't going to hold until landing. They would fail entirely before reaching the riverbank if she didn't act fast. She glanced at the co-pilot. His hands were trembling so violently he could barely hold the throttle. Emily took a deep breath, heart pounding, and whispered instructions as if she were speaking to the plane itself. "Flaps 30 degrees. Glide angle 10 degrees. Hold steady. Trust the formation. We can do this." Outside, the F-22s responded, their engines roaring, creating a protective wind corridor. Emily could see the lead jet dipping lower, almost touching the turbulence-choked air below. She felt a surge of adrenaline. Somehow, the impossible was happening. The pilots above were listening to a child. The co-pilot was listening to a child. The plane was listening to a child. Another violent jolt threw passengers against their seatbacks. A scream rang out. Emily gritted her teeth, pressing the intercom one last time. "Hold the wings. Focus on the river bend. Steady, steady." The valley was near, but jagged cliffs loomed ominously on either side. Smoke poured thicker from the right engine, and sparks trailed along the fuselage. The Cessna groaned under the strain, as if protesting the impossible task ahead. Emily's pulse thundered. One false move now and they wouldn't survive. She pressed her forehead to the window, mapping the river, the flat sandbars, and the looming cliffs. Her hands gripped the armrest, white-knuckled, and she whispered, "We can do this. We have to." Suddenly, a shadow fell across the plain, a rapid, dark shape moving far too fast for Emily to identify. Her stomach lurched. Something else was coming, something the F-22s hadn't anticipated. She pressed the intercom, voice trembling but resolute. "Jets, brace, something's hitting us. Hold formation." The cabin shook violently. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared. Emily's heart pounded. She realized the emergency wasn't just failing engines or turbulence anymore. Something unseen, something dangerous had entered their sky, and the valley below was still their only hope for survival. Emily Larson's small hands trembled as she pressed the intercom again. Her voice, steady despite the quaking of the cabin, carried over the roar of the failing engines. "F-22s, maintain formation. I'm guiding the glide path. Follow my lead. We're heading for the valley." Above, the silver Raptors adjusted instantaneously. Their pilots, elite warriors of the sky, formed a tight, protective wedge around the struggling Cessna. One of the jets dipped sharply, passing so close that Emily could see the faint reflection of her tiny plane in the pilot's visor. Her pulse surged. She realized these military pilots were now trusting her instincts, an 8-year-old in row 8, to save the plane and its passengers. The cabin shook violently. Smoke poured from the right engine, curling along the ceiling in angry black waves. A passenger screamed, clutching their child, while another vomited from fear. Emily ignored them. She could feel the panic threatening to overtake her, but she forced herself to breathe, just as her father had taught her in countless simulator sessions. Breathe. Focus. Calculate. She pressed the intercom button again. Co-pilot, adjust flaps 30 degrees, throttle gently now. Glide angle 10 degrees, follow my path, steady. The co-pilot nodded, hands shaking as he adjusted the controls. The Cessna lurched but responded. Emily's gaze returned to the sky. The F-22s were no longer just protecting them, they were actively guiding them. One of the jets mirrored her glide trajectory, creating an invisible corridor through turbulence, as if the plane itself could feel her commands. Suddenly, a violent gust slammed into the left wing, twisting the fuselage. Emily's stomach lurched. Passengers screamed, some clutching the overhead bins as the plane tilted dangerously. She gritted her teeth, whispering to herself, "We can do this. We have to." She pressed the intercom again, voice rising over the alarms and engine sputters. "Hold steady. Align with the lead jet. Follow its signals. We can make the valley if we stay together." Above, the F-22s responded immediately, adjusting their formation, banking sharply to shield the Cessna from the worst of the wind currents. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline. The impossible was happening. Military jets, piloted by some of the most trained aviators in the world, were now following the instructions of a child, and she had no time to hesitate. The plane shuddered violently again, the right engine sputtering sparks and smoke. Emily's mind raced through every emergency scenario she had learned. She imagined the glide ratio, the optimal descent angle, and the precise alignment with the valley below. The river snaked through the landscape like a silver ribbon, a fragile lifeline in a rugged canyon. She whispered instructions again, her voice clear, precise, almost eerily calm for someone her age. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide angle 10, hold steady. Focus on the river bend." The co-pilot followed her guidance, the plane groaning under the strain. Outside, the F-22s formed a protective wedge, engines roaring, slicing through the turbulent air like guardians of the sky. Emily watched, awestruck, as one of the jets dipped dangerously low, its afterburner trailing heat waves that shimmered against the smoky backdrop. Then came another violent jolt. The Cessna pitched sideways, sending passengers tumbling against their seats. A woman screamed, clutching her child. Emily's stomach dropped, but she gritted her teeth and pressed the intercom again. "Hold the wings, steady. Follow the lead jet. The valley is close. Align now." The lead F-22 dipped lower, its shadow racing across the fuselage. Emily realized the pilot had recognized her command instinctively, adjusting his trajectory to create the safest possible glide corridor for the small plane. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the conductor of a life-or-death symphony, the small hand directing a team of sky warriors against a storm of metal, smoke, and wind. Another jolt shook the plane. Smoke now filled the cabin more thickly, acrid and choking. The co-pilot's hands shook violently on the throttle. Emily swallowed the panic clawing at her chest. She pressed the intercom again, voice firm despite the fear. "Throttle up slightly, keep the wings level, follow the lead jet's signals, we can make it." Outside, the F-22s adjusted, banking in unison to create a protective corridor. Emily felt a surreal connection to these pilots, strangers yet allies. She could see the subtle signals, the tilt of the wings, the shift of the canopy reflections. Every move they made was responding to her instructions, trusting the calculations of a child who had never flown this plane before. The valley below grew larger, but so did the danger. Jagged cliffs loomed on either side, the river twisting like a silver snake through rocks and sandbars. Smoke trailed from the right engine in thick black clouds. Emily's pulse raced. One miscalculation now would send the plane tumbling into the rocky canyon. She glanced at the co-pilot. His hands trembled, sweat streaking his face. Emily pressed the intercom once more, calm but commanding. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide angle 10 degrees, hold steady. Align with the river bend, we will make it." The F-22s adjusted instantaneously. The lead jet dipped lower, its afterburner casting a heat shimmer across the fuselage. Emily felt a surge of hope. For the first time, she saw a path, a narrow, precise corridor through the sky and terrain that could save them. But then an unexpected threat emerged. A shadow streaked past the Cessna, moving far too fast for Emily to identify. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't birds, it wasn't debris. Something else was in the sky, something the F-22 pilots hadn't anticipated. Emily pressed the intercom, voice trembling but resolute. "Jets, brace, something's hitting us. Hold formation." The cabin shook violently. Smoke filled the air. Passengers screamed, some hitting the ceiling in terror. Emily's heart pounded. She realized this was no longer just a failing engine. This was a mechanical threat, or worse, a looming danger that could destroy them before they even reached the valley. Emily's small mind worked furiously. She remembered every emergency maneuver, every simulation scenario. She focused on the river below, the only safe landing option left. She adjusted her instructions, concise and precise. Throttle gentle, glide 10 degrees, follow my path, valley is our only chance. The co-pilot followed, the plane responding sluggishly but steadily. The F-22s shifted, blocking the Cessna from the worst of the turbulence and shielding them from whatever shadow threatened from above. Emily felt her chest tighten. The world had narrowed to engine, smoke, and the silver jets above, a high-stakes ballet of life and death. A violent jolt threw passengers to the floor. Alarms blared. Emily pressed her forehead to the window, tracing the river's curves, noting the flat sandbars below. Her heart raced. Seconds mattered. One wrong calculation, and everything would end in a fiery crash. The shadow passed again, closer this time, its form indistinct but menacing. Emily pressed the intercom, her voice rising above the chaos. "Jets, maintain formation. Protect the plane. Steady glide to the valley. We can make it." Outside, the F-22s responded immediately, banking and twisting in perfect synchrony. Emily felt a surge of awe and fear. She was a child, yes, but in this moment she was the lifeline, the decision-maker, the one holding the threads of life and death together. Smoke thickened. The right engine sputtered violently. The co-pilot's hands shook uncontrollably. Emily took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of training and instinct. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide angle 10, hold steady, align with the river bend," she repeated, voice clear and unwavering. The lead F-22 dipped lower, the afterburner shimmering against the smoky sky. Emily's pulse thundered. The valley was near. The planes above shielded them, guided them, and trusted her commands. She realized in that moment that she was no longer just a passenger in row 8. She was the orchestrator of survival, the small hand guiding elite pilots through impossible skis. Then, as the Cessna pitched violently again, she knew the final challenge was coming. The valley was within reach, but the plane's engines were on the brink of complete failure, and the unknown threat still loomed above. Emily swallowed her fear, pressed the intercom one last time, and whispered, "Hold steady, we're almost there." The valley stretched below like a silver ribbon cut through jagged rock. Emily Larson's small hands gripped the armrest, knuckles white, as the Cessna Dove shuddered violently. Smoke poured from the right engine, black and acrid, curling along the ceiling and choking the passengers. Alarms blared in an endless, deafening chorus. The world outside twisted, clouds whipping past at impossible speeds. The valley was their only chance, and it felt impossibly far. Emily swallowed hard and pressed the intercom again, her voice trembling but firm. "Co-pilot, hold the wings level. Flaps 30 degrees. Glide angle 10 degrees. Steady, steady, valley straight ahead." The co-pilot nodded, hands shaking, sweat dripping down his temples. He struggled to keep the plane stable, the Cessna groaning under the strain. Passengers clutched each other, faces pale and terrified, some murmuring prayers. Emily pressed her forehead to the small cockpit panel, scanning every indicator, every warning light. She had memorized emergency procedures in her father's simulator for years, but this was real. Lives hung on her ability to think clearly. Above, the F-22 Raptors sliced through the sky like silver phantoms. They formed a protective wedge around the Cessna, engines roaring, creating a corridor that shielded the small plane from the worst of the wind and turbulence. One jet banked sharply, signaling Emily to maintain speed and glide path. Her pulse raced. The pilots were trusting her, following a child's commands to survive. She could hardly believe it herself. The plane lurched again violently and Emily's stomach flipped. The right engine sputtered sparks, a violent cough of fire escaping from the nacelle. She pressed the intercom once more. "Hold steady, valley straight ahead, follow my glide path, we can make it." A passenger screamed, clutching a child tightly. The co-pilot muttered under his breath, panic evident in every movement. Emily swallowed her fear and focused on the valley. Jagged cliffs lined either side, narrowing the window for survival. Trees loomed like dark sentinels, the river winding below like a liquid lifeline. Her eyes traced the terrain, identifying flat patches of sand and gravel, the only viable landing spots. Suddenly, a violent gust slammed the plane sideways. Alarms blared, passengers shouted. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She pressed the intercom, voice cutting through the chaos. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide 10 degrees, align with the river bend, hold steady." Outside, the F-22s responded, adjusting their formations with perfect precision. One jet dipped dangerously low, creating a protective wind corridor. Emily felt a wave of awe and fear. The pilots were executing life-saving maneuvers, but it was she, the child in row 8, who was orchestrating the descent. The valley grew closer. The river twisted below, the flat sandbars becoming more visible. Smoke from the engine thickened, acrid and suffocating. Emily pressed her bare against her chest and whispered, "We can do this. We have to." Another jolt threw passengers into the aisle. The co-pilot shouted, panic in his voice. "We're losing altitude fast, engines failing completely." Emily's stomach dropped. There was no time to hesitate. She pressed the intercom, small but commanding. "Follow the lead jet, steady. Don't panic, focus on the river, we'll make it." The lead F-22 banked sharply, creating a perfect glide corridor. Emily followed it mentally, tracing every curve of the river, every obstacle along the valley floor. Trees, jagged rocks, and uneven terrain loomed like predators. One miscalculation could send them tumbling into disaster. Suddenly, a shadow swept over the Cessna, moving far too fast for Emily to track. Her pulse raced. It wasn't birds and it wasn't debris. Something else was in the sky, a mechanical threat perhaps, or a sudden gust amplified by the canyon walls. She pressed the intercom again. "Jets, brace, something's hitting us. Stay in formation. Valley is our only hope." The F-22s adjusted, banking and twisting to shield the Cessna. Emily's small mind raced, calculating wind speed, glide angle, descent trajectory. She realized they were entering the most dangerous stretch. The valley narrowed sharply, cliffs rising like walls on either side. Smoke thickened from the failing engine. Every second mattered. One wrong move now would be fatal. Emily's pulse thundered as she guided the co-pilot through the maneuvers. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide 10 degrees, focus on the river bend." The co-pilot obeyed, hands shaking, trusting the words of an 8-year-old who had spent her life imagining moments like this in simulations. The valley floor rushed closer. Sandbars and flat patches gleamed like beacons of hope, but they were dangerously narrow. The Cessna pitched again, smoke from the engine trailing behind. Passengers screamed, crying, clutching each other. Emily swallowed her fear and pressed the intercom. "Steady. Stay aligned with the lead jet. Valley is right ahead. We can make it." The lead F-22 dipped lower, shielding the Cessna from the worst turbulence. Emily followed the jet, movements precisely, adjusting the glide path to avoid jagged cliffs. The river widened slightly, sandbars visible, the only viable landing spot. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with terror. Every calculation, every instruction, every command mattered. She was the orchestrator of survival. Another violent jolt. Sparks flew from the right engine. Smoke filled the cabin. The co-pilot's hands shook uncontrollably. Emily's heart raced. She pressed the intercom one last time. Hold steady, focus, align with the river bend, glide straight to the valley, we can make it. Outside, the F-22s responded immediately, adjusting formations, banking in perfect synchrony. Emily felt a surreal connection with the pilots above, strangers yet allies. Their trust gave her courage. She focused on the river, scanning for the perfect sandbar to land. She could see the flat patches shimmering below, and for the first time, hope ignited in her chest. The valley narrowed further, trees loomed like walls. The river curved sharply. Sparks and smoke from the failing engine filled the cabin, the acrid scent choking the passengers. Emily pressed the intercom again. Flaps 30 degrees. Glide angle 10. Steady. Keep the wings level. Focus on the river bend. The co-pilot obeyed, hands trembling, the plane responding sluggishly but steadily. Emily felt the lead jet dip lower, signaling the final approach. The F-22s roared above, engines creating a wind corridor that shielded the Cessna from the worst turbulence. Emily's chest tightened. They were so close, yet danger still surrounded them. Suddenly, a violent gust slammed into the fuselage, throwing passengers sideways. A scream pierced the cabin. Emily gritted her teeth, pressing the intercom again. Hold steady. Valley is right ahead. Glide, we can make it. The plane responded. Slowly, miraculously, it aligned with the narrow river corridor. The sandbars below gleamed like life itself. Emily's small hands gripped the armrest, knuckles white, as she whispered, "Almost there, almost there." The F-22s above adjusted their final positions, creating a protective wedge. Emily felt a strange calm wash over her. They were close. If she could maintain this glide for just a few more seconds, they could survive. But the engines were failing completely. Sparks trailed from the right nacelle, smoke thickened, and the plane groaned under the strain. Emily pressed the intercom one last time, voice small but unwavering. "Hold steady. Valley is right ahead. Glide. Focus. We're going to make it." And then the Cessna jolted violently, as if protesting the impossible feat it had been forced to perform. Sparks and smoke filled the cabin. Emily's stomach lurched. She realized the final descent would be the hardest. Every second now could mean life or death. The valley stretched out like a fragile lifeline beneath the Cessna Dove, shimmering under the late afternoon sun. Emily Larson's small hands gripped the armrest, knuckles white as she leaned forward, eyes locked on the narrow river corridor below. Smoke from the failing right engine choked the cabin, curling in thick black waves that made her eyes water. Alarms shrieked, passengers screamed, and the plane groaned under the strain, but Emily's mind was calm, precise, and focused. "Flaps 30 degrees, glide 10 degrees, steady, steady," she whispered, pressing the intercom repeatedly. Her tiny voice cut through the chaos like a lifeline, giving instructions that carried weight far beyond her years. The co-pilot's hands shook violently on the throttle, but he followed her every command, trusting the instincts of an 8-year-old who had never flown this plane in real life. Outside, the F-22 Raptors sliced through the turbulent sky like guardian angels of metal. They formed a tight wedge, their engines roaring in unison, creating a protective corridor around the Cessna. One lead jet dipped lower, signaling Emily to maintain speed and alignment with the river bend below. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of awe and fear. The pilots above trusted her. They relied on her calculations, her commands, and the instinct she didn't even know she had. The valley narrowed sharply. Cliffs loomed on either side, jagged and unforgiving. Trees rose like black sentinels, the river winding below like a silver ribbon of hope. Emily traced every twist and turn in her mind, identifying the flat sandbars that could serve as makeshift landing strips. The only thing standing between them and disaster was her ability to maintain composure, clarity, and precision under pressure. A violent jolt threw passengers sideways. A woman screamed, clutching a child. Emily pressed the intercom again, voice unwavering. "Hold steady. Follow the lead jet. Align with the river bend. We can make it." The co-pilot's hands were trembling, but he obeyed. The plane lurched, smoke trailing thickly from the right engine. Sparks danced along the nacelle and the cabin was filled with the acrid scent of burning metal. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing her fear aside. She had to guide them. Every passenger, every life in this plane depended on her. The F-22s adjusted, banking sharply to shield the Cessna from turbulence. Emily noticed the subtle signals from the lead jet, a tilt of the wings, a flick of the afterburner guiding her through the final descent. She pressed the intercom again, voice steady despite the chaos. Flaps 30 degrees, glide angle 10, steady, focus on the river bend. The river widened slightly. Sandbars glinted like life itself, narrow and fragile but just enough to serve as landing points. Emily's pulse thundered. One wrong move now could send them tumbling into jagged rocks or trees. She leaned forward, calculating angles, speed, and wind. She imagined the glide path in her mind, every twist and turn mapped with the precision of a master pilot. Another violent jolt shook the plane. Sparks flew from the right engine and thick black smoke filled the cabin. The co-pilot shouted, panic evident in his voice. Emily pressed the intercom again. Steady, Valley is right ahead, follow the lead jet, focus. The F-22s adjusted instantly, creating a corridor of protection. Emily could see the lead jet dipping dangerously low, engines roaring, signaling the final approach. Her chest tightened. They were close, so close, but the plane was failing rapidly. The final descent would be the most dangerous stretch. Emily's eyes scanned the valley floor. The sandbars looked impossibly narrow. Trees loomed on either side, jagged cliffs rising like walls. Sparks danced from the engine. Smoke choked the cabin. Every second now was critical. She pressed the intercom one last time, small voice firm and commanding. Hold steady, glide straight, align with the sandbar, we can make it. The co-pilot obeyed, adjusting throttle and flaps as the plane responded sluggishly. The Cessna tilted slightly, smoke trailing in thick plumes. Emily's pulse pounded. Outside, the F-22s roared in synchrony, creating a protective corridor that shielded the plane from turbulence. She felt a strange connection to the pilots above, strangers who were now allies, trusting her to guide them to safety. The plane lurched again, violent enough to send passengers tumbling. Emily pressed the intercom, voice clear despite the chaos. Steady, focus, follow my glide path, valley is our only chance. The valley grew closer. The river widened, sandbars glinting like silver beacons. Sparks from the failing engine illuminated the interior like a strobe of warning. Emily swallowed her fear, forcing herself to focus. She had mapped the descent, calculated the angle, and identified the perfect landing patch. Now it was a matter of execution. Another jolt. Smoke thickened. Alarms blared. Passengers screamed, clutching each other, praying. Emily's heart hammered, but she pressed the intercom again. Flaps 30 degrees, glide 10 degrees, align with the river, hold steady. The co-pilot followed, hands shaking violently, the plane responding sluggishly but steadily. The lead F-22 dipped lower, afterburner shimmering against the smoky sky, guiding them like a silver arrow. Emily felt a surge of adrenaline. The impossible was happening. They were surviving. The plane descended further. The sandbar grew larger. The river's bend was just ahead. Emily could see the flat patch of gravel, their only hope. Sparks continued to fly from the right engine. Smoke thickened. The plane groaned under the strain. One wrong calculation now would be fatal. Emily pressed the intercom again, her small voice unwavering. Steady. Valley is right ahead. Follow the lead jet. Focus on the sandbar. The co-pilot adjusted, following her instructions to the letter. The plane responded sluggishly but obediently. Outside, the F-22s formed a final protective wedge, shielding the Cessna from the worst turbulence. Emily felt a mix of awe and fear. She was a child in row 8, guiding elite pilots, saving lives. The sandbar loomed closer. Trees flanked either side. Jagged cliffs rose like walls. Smoke poured thickly from the engine. The plane shuddered violently, groaning under the impossible descent. Emily pressed the intercom again. Hold steady, glide straight, sandbar ahead, we can do this. The F-22s adjusted their positions, engines roaring, shielding them from turbulence. Emily's pulse thundered. She leaned forward, calculating angles, speed, and descent. She visualized the plane touching down safely, wheels skimming the sandbar. Her hands gripped the armrest, white-knuckled, as she whispered, "Almost there, almost there." The plane lurched violently, sparks flew, smoke thickened. The co-pilot's hands shook uncontrollably. Emily pressed the intercom one last time. "Steady, glide, align with the sandbar, we're almost there." And then, with a violent shudder, the Cessna's wheels touched the gravel. The plane skidded slightly, smoke trailing from the engine, but it held. Emily's chest heaved. She had done it. Against impossible odds, she had guided the failing plane through a narrow canyon, under elite military escort, to the only viable landing spot. Passengers screamed and cried, some hugging each other, some falling to their knees in relief. The co-pilot slumped back, pale and trembling, whispering, We made it." Outside, the F-22s roared in triumph, banking away once the Cessna was safe. Emily leaned back in her seat, clutching her bear, eyes wide with disbelief. She was still 8. She had still not fully grasped the enormity of what had just happened. Lives had been saved by a child's instincts and courage, and by pilots who trusted her. But just as relief began to wash over the cabin, a loud crack echoed from the failing engine. Smoke billowed, acrid and choking. Emily's pulse thundered again. The danger was not entirely over. The sandbar beneath the Cessna Dove quivered under the strain of its battered frame. Sparks still shot from the right engine, smoke curling in thick, choking tendrils. Passengers sat frozen, wide-eyed, hugging children, praying aloud. Emily Larson, still gripping her bear, felt a momentary wave of disbelief. They had survived the impossible descent, guided by an 8-year-old's courage and instincts. But relief was short-lived. From the valley walls, a low, ominous rumble echoed, like the canyon itself groaned under their weight. Dust and loose rocks tumbled from the cliffs, the air vibrating with a threatening energy. Emily's pulse thundered. The riverbed, which had just been their lifeline, now seemed perilously unstable. One misstep and the fragile sandbar could collapse beneath them, sending the plane tumbling into the rocky gorge. She pressed the intercom, voice small but commanding. "Everyone stay calm. Do not move. Keep your belts fastened. Hold on to your children." The co-pilot's hands shook as he adjusted the throttle, trying to keep the plane stationary. Smoke and sparks from the failing engine filled the cabin, acrid and suffocating. Emily swallowed her fear, glancing at the passengers. They were terrified, and rightfully so. But she couldn't panic, not now, not ever. Lives were still in her hands. Outside, the F-22 Raptors hovered, engines roaring like protective sentinels. The pilots had not left their side. They maintained their wedge formation over the valley, scanning for threats and debris. Emily felt a surge of relief knowing they were still watching, still ready to respond if anything went wrong. And then she saw it. From the cliffs above, a massive boulder dislodged, tumbling toward the sandbar with a terrifying roar. Emily's stomach dropped. The plane had survived the impossible descent only to face a new threat, one that could crush them instantly. She pressed the intercom again, voice trembling but resolute. "Co-pilot, emergency throttle, slight reverse, brace for impact." The co-pilot obeyed, trying to shift the Cessna back just enough to avoid the falling rock. The F-22s reacted instantly, their afterburners kicking up wind to divert smaller debris away from the plane. Emily's small mind worked furiously. She calculated angles, trajectory, timing. The sandbar was unstable, the boulder was massive, and seconds were all they had. "Steady, steady," she whispered to herself, pressing the intercom again. "Everyone hold tight, we're going to be fine. Focus on staying seated." The boulder slammed into the edge of the sandbar with a deafening crash, sending debris flying. The plane rocked violently, throwing passengers into their seats. Screams filled the cabin. Emily pressed the intercom once more, voice commanding despite the chaos. "Hold steady, brace." F-22s are protecting us. We're safe if we stay calm. One of the F-22 pilots banked sharply, directing a gust of wind that diverted falling debris away from the Cessna. Emily's eyes widened in awe. These pilots, her invisible guardians, were still trusting her commands, still responding to the child who had guided them to survival. But the danger wasn't over. Another low rumble echoed from the canyon walls, louder this time. Rocks the size of cars shifted precariously, threatening to fall. Emily's chest tightened. The valley was unstable, but moving the plane along the sandbar could trigger a collapse. She had to act carefully, with precision that would challenge even the most seasoned pilot. "Co-pilot," she whispered through the intercom, "we need to inch forward slowly, follow my glide alignment. 1 foot at a time, avoid loose rocks. F-22s shield the plane from debris." The co-pilot nodded, pale and shaking, trusting the guidance of an 8-year-old. The Cessna shifted slightly forward, wheels skimming the fragile sandbar. Dust and gravel tumbled around them, but they remained intact. Emily's pulse pounded. She could feel the instability beneath the plane, the weight of every life aboard pressing on her tiny shoulders. A woman behind her gasped, holding her child. Is she really flying this plane?" Emily's father whispered, awestruck, tears streaking his soot-streaked face. Emily gave him a small nod, lips pressed tight. There was no time for celebration. Survival still demanded her full attention. From the cliffs, another boulder began to shift. Emily's mind raced. She had to coordinate a final movement, a small adjustment to the Cessna's position that would take them out of the valley's most dangerous zone. She pressed the intercom again. "Co-pilot, 2 degrees starboard, slight rudder, keep wings level, we can clear the danger zone." The co-pilot adjusted the rudder, trembling, the plane responding sluggishly but obediently. Sparks shot from the right engine. Smoke filled the cabin. Dust and small rocks tumbled around them, but the Cessna inched forward, gradually clearing the most unstable portion of the sandbar. Emily held her bear tightly, whispering to herself, "Almost there, almost there." The F-22s above angled sharply, directing gusts to divert falling debris away from the Cessna. Emily felt a strange, powerful connection to the pilots. They were no longer just observers. They were her partners, executing maneuvers based on her commands, trusting her judgment to navigate the final, perilous moments. Another loud rumble echoed. The cliffs trembled. Rocks shifted. Emily pressed the intercom again, small but unwavering. "Hold steady, keep the wings level, focus. We're almost safe." The plane continued to inch forward, sparks trailing from the engine. Smoke filled the cabin, choking the passengers, but Emily's voice remained a steady thread through the chaos. She guided every movement, calculated every minor adjustment, and kept the plane from tipping into disaster. Finally, the Cessna cleared the most unstable portion of the sandbar. Dust and gravel settled, sparks sputtered, smoke curled but began to thin. The plane trembled but remained intact. Emily exhaled, a small shuddering breath, and pressed the intercom once more. "We made it, keep calm, we're almost out." Passengers slowly lifted their heads, crying, hugging children, disbelief and relief mixing in their wide eyes. Emily felt a swell of emotion herself, fear, awe, and a cautious hope. They had survived not only a failing plane but the treacherous valley itself. Above, the F-22s roared in a final protective maneuver, engines blazing as if celebrating the survival of the tiny plane. Emily's pulse began to slow slightly, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She pressed her forehead to the cockpit panel, realizing she had just guided a real plane, with real people, through a near-impossible catastrophe. But as the smoke cleared slightly and the canyon walls settled, a new sound cut through the valley, the distant wail of approaching sirens, voices over radio chatter. Emergency teams were closing in, alerted by the pilots above and the distress signals Emily had somehow helped maintain during the crisis. Emily felt a flicker of pride, though tempered by exhaustion. She had done it. Against impossible odds, she had guided the Cessna Dove, saved every passenger, and coordinated with elite military pilots. She was still a child, still 8 years old, but she had faced the unimaginable and emerged as the hero of Flight 317. Yet even in that moment of fragile relief, Emily knew the story wasn't fully over. The plane rested on the sandbar, engines sputtering, and the valley itself had proven unpredictable and dangerous. She pressed the intercom one last time. "Everyone, stay calm, help is coming, we're safe for now." The valley was quiet now, but the air remained tense. Dust settled on the sandbar, smoke from the right engine curling into the sky. Emily Larson's small hands rested on her bare, chest heaving, eyes wide from exhaustion and disbelief. They had survived the impossible descent. The Cessna Dove, battered and smoking, sat precariously on the narrow riverbank, but every passenger was alive. Every single soul had trusted the instructions of an 8-year-old, and every one of them had survived. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, and Emily could hear the faint roar of approaching rescue helicopters. Emergency teams were closing in, alerted by the F-22 pilots above, and the distress signals that Emily had somehow helped maintain during the crisis. She pressed the intercom, voice small but steady. "Everyone, stay calm, help is here. We're going to be safe for real this time." Passengers began to stir, some clutching children, some crying from exhaustion and relief. The co-pilot leaned back, pale and trembling, whispering under his breath, "We made it, we actually made it." Emily's father placed a hand on her shoulder, tears streaking his soot-stained face. He looked at her with a mixture of awe, pride, and disbelief. From above, the F-22s maintained their positions, engines roaring, creating a protective cover as the rescue helicopters descended. The pilots had not left her side. They had guided her through the sky, shielded the plane from turbulence and debris, and trusted her judgment in a situation most adults would have considered impossible. Emily felt a strange warmth in her chest. They had trusted her, and together, they had saved everyone. Then the first rescue helicopter touched down on the sandbar, its rotors whipping dust and gravel into the air. Emergency responders leapt out, securing ropes and stretchers, moving quickly to evacuate passengers. Emily's pulse still raced as she realized they were finally safe. She pressed the intercom again, calming passengers as they prepared to disembark. "Stay calm. Follow the crew, you're safe now." One by one, passengers climbed into the helicopters, eyes wide with tears and gratitude. Emily watched them go, the weight of the moment settling on her small shoulders. She was still 8, still a child, but she had just orchestrated a life-saving rescue. The co-pilot finally exhaled, looking at Emily with awe. "Kid, you saved everyone," he said, voice trembling. Emily merely nodded, clutching her bear tighter. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted, relieved, and still very small in a world that had suddenly felt impossibly large and dangerous. The F-22 pilots hovered briefly, engines roaring, then banked in unison. One of the lead pilots, still above in his cockpit, spoke over the emergency frequency. "Kid, that was incredible. We've never had a passenger guide a plane like that before. You just saved everyone." Emily swallowed, heart pounding. "I just did what I had to," she thought, still processing the magnitude of what had happened. She pressed the intercom one last time, addressing the remaining passengers and crew. "Everyone, we're safe, help is here. You're all going to be okay." Emergency crews worked quickly, evacuating the remaining passengers and the co-pilot. Emily's father helped her out of the plane, holding her tight as dust and smoke swirled around them. He whispered, voice thick with emotion, "I don't even know what to say. You did something incredible, Emily." She leaned against him, exhausted, and whispered, "I just did what I had to do." The F-22 pilots hovered above for a final sweep, ensuring the valley was clear and no other hazards threatened the rescue operation. Then, one by one, they banked sharply and disappeared into the sky, leaving the sandbar quiet once more. Emily's eyes followed them, a mixture of awe and gratitude filling her chest. She had faced the unimaginable, and in doing so, she had forged an unspoken bond with these elite pilots, one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. As the emergency crews finished evacuating passengers, Emily's father turned to her. "I've trained you in simulators, but nothing could have prepared me for this. You just saved everyone on this plane. Everyone." Emily swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. She realized the enormity of what had happened. She had guided a failing Cessna through a narrow canyon, protected by F-22 Raptors, through engine failure, turbulence, and falling debris. And she had done it. Every passenger was alive. Every life had been saved because of her courage, composure, and instinct. The last passengers were loaded into helicopters. Emily stood on the sandbar, clutching her bear, watching the valley that had tested them all. The cliffs loomed high, shadows lengthening in the late afternoon sun. She glanced at the F-22 pilots one last time as they disappeared into the horizon, engines roaring like a final salute. She felt a wave of pride mixed with exhaustion and disbelief. Then, as the dust settled and emergency crews began surveying the valley for hazards, a small voice over the radio crackled. "Flight 317, this is Control Tower. We have your location. All passengers are safe. Good work, all of you." Emily smiled faintly, clutching her bear tighter. We did it," she whispered. Her father wrapped an arm around her shoulder, holding her close as helicopters lifted the passengers out. He whispered again, voice filled with pride. "You were just a kid in row 8, and you just became a hero. Everyone owes you their lives." Emily looked back at the valley one last time, the cliffs casting long shadows over the river. She felt a strange calm wash over her. The terror, the chaos, the impossibility of it all, it had happened. And they had survived. As the final helicopter lifted off, carrying the last of the passengers and crew, Emily took a deep breath. Her small hands relaxed, and she looked at the F-22 pilots one last time on her radio display, knowing they were out there somewhere in the sky, watching, ready to protect others if needed. She realized something profound. Courage didn't come from size, age, or experience. It came from clarity, focus, and the will to act when others couldn't. She had learned this in the most extreme way imaginable, and had saved more lives than she could ever have imagined. And as Flight 317 was finally clear of danger, Emily Larson, still clutching her bear, still just a kid, looked at her father and whispered, almost to herself, "I hope we never have to do that again, but I know I could." The valley remained quiet, but the story of the 8-year-old who had commanded F-22 pilots and saved everyone on board Flight 317 would echo far beyond its cliffs, a tale of courage, instinct, and unshakable resolve.